This is our 10th anniversary celebration of the Speaker Series of South Haven. First, let's look back at our 10-year history of presenting speakers and topics that fulfill our mission of issues, innovations, and ideas shaping our lives. Like so many South Haven events and activities, the Speaker Series got its initial leadership and financial support from Shout. After a year of planning, researching issues, topics, and speakers, the inaugural program was held April 29th, 2015. By the end of this 10th season, 40 programs will have been presented by our series. Photos and full videos of the series are on our website, southavenspeakerseries.org. And now, voices from across the aisle.
It is my honor and distinct pleasure and privilege to introduce a woman I have admired for many years, Congresswoman Debbie Dingell. Debbie Dingell represents Michigan's 6th district in the U.S. House of Representatives. She's a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee and the Natural Resources Committee. Though she represents a district on the other side of the state from us, Debbie is a recognized leader in Congress on issues that we care deeply about here in Southwest Michigan and South Haven: affordable and accessible health care, strengthening manufacturing in America, supporting our veterans, and, extremely important to all of us, protecting our natural resources. And in fact, Congresswoman Dingell is the chair of the Great Lakes Task Force and is an advocate for protecting the environment, including one of Michigan's treasures, our incredible Great Lakes. Before being elected to Congress in 2015, Debbie, a self-proclaimed car girl, worked in the auto industry for over 30 years, where she was president of the General Motors Foundation and a senior GM executive responsible for public affairs. She was chair of the Wayne State Board of Governors, and she has a long, long list of volunteer involvement that shows her deep commitment to the things that she cares about and supports. Debbie was married for 38 years to the love of her life, Congressman John Dingell, who served and represented the Detroit area for 60 years and holds the record as the longest serving member of Congress. Debbie is an amazing public servant in so many ways, but the reason we invited her to speak tonight is that Debbie Dingell is known for her collaborative work style and her belief that working together in a bipartisan way is the best way to get things done. And her friendship and working relationship with our former Congressman Fred Upton is an example of how that can happen. So join me in welcoming Debbie Dingell.
18 terms, 36 years in Congress. Problem Solvers Caucus. Led the Moonshot Initiative. Y'all know what that is, right? Fred's going to talk about it, but it has to do with the cure for cancer. In fact, some of you were in St. Joe the night Joe Biden showed up to do a speech. Do you mind if I share this story? I'm going to do it. Joe Biden was at the Econ Club in St. Joe, I think in 2016, 18. He was no longer in office, and he was giving a speech before the Econ Club. Room was full. Dinner was served. Probably 1,500 people listening. And he got up there, and one of the first things out of his mouth was praise and admiration and thanks to Fred Upton. Think about that. And that was over the moonshot. There's a whole other side of that story we won't share tonight, but it was an awesome evening to be sitting there listening to that bipartisan type of an approach. Fred also is very focused on economic development, community development, safe water and streams. He has worked tirelessly to help support the state of Michigan. And the beauty of what we're going to talk about tonight is the commonality between two people on opposite sides of the states, different genders, different parties, different political views, and yet working side by side, shoulder to shoulder, to benefit the state of Michigan. That's the story tonight. With that, welcome Fred Upton. And finally, we weren't sure we were going to get Rick tonight. He got caught in a traffic jam. He was waiting for a call to go see a presidential candidate that unfortunately did not come into Michigan tonight. But Rick Albin, Wood TV8, political anchor. You see him every Sunday morning on the news. And Rick, it's a pleasure to have you with us tonight.
The idea is talk about how people from across the aisle, across the state, and with different backgrounds and different visions come together to work together. And let me just say at the outset, you don't always. I remember one day on Mackinac Island during the conference, and you and Fred had some sharp differences about, I believe it was the Affordable Care Act, but I don't remember exactly what that was.
But I think he agrees with me now.
No.
Don't need to go there.
So I'm going to start with you Debbie. You heard what Joan said. That's how people view you, and it's true. It's what you do. How do you do it when, and I say this with no disrespect, when on this side and on this side, the people on the fringes continues to grow and have influence. So how do you come to where most of this room is in the middle?
First of all, it's great to be with you, Rick, and I love Fred Upton. And Amy doesn't agree with me, but I would do anything if you could find a way to get him to come back to the Congress. We need Fred Upton in the Congress. I know Amy doesn't agree with me. But we can't give up. I mean, there are days, it's gotten really up. I had a horrific, you don't know how nice it is to be with you tonight, because I had a horrific town hall meeting last night, and some of the participants, Corps of the Engineers, said to me, you know, I've been at a lot of tough meetings, but the level of disrespect, hatred, personal attacks, etc., that occurred last night, I'm concerned that it's reflective of what's happening in our country. And we can't give up. I mean, Fred got redistricted and it got complicated, but I'm not going to give up. I believe in working across the aisle. Quite frankly, there are days, as Fred knows, I'd rather sit on the Republican side of the floor than the Democratic side of the floor. I believe we respect each other. You know, you get to the best place by listening to each other. We've all had different life experiences. We know different things. If you put people at the table who have different perspectives and you all talk about where you think you need to go, maybe if you listen to each other, you get to the right place. And if we all quit, I want you to think what it's going to be like if Marjorie Taylor Greene and Cori Bush, and I shouldn't have brought out any names, but we wouldn't get anything done. Not that we're getting a lot done right now. We have more message bills than we do on accomplishing anything. And if we leave it to the far right and the far left, and I shouldn't have named any names, we're not going to get it done. Democracy is on the line, and democracy is on the line this November. I want to say that very clearly, Rick.
Just briefly, do you agree with, please go ahead. Do you agree with the assessment, you certainly don't have to, that those factions within the both caucuses are generating more and more power, or at least getting more attention?
I think they're getting attention. Now, look, I get along, Fred knows this. The head of the Freedom Caucus, or was, I don't know, Chip Roy is across, Fred. And we love each other. We talk to each other. We respect each other. We agree on nothing, I suspect. But we really do talk to each other. And I think that's important. But I also think that there are people that do what they do to tear government apart. They do what they do to get the headlines, to get the sensationalism. And I think that's where, and we were both members of Problem Solvers, and I'm sure we're going to end up talking about that, although it's having its moments too right now. But we can't give up. We cannot let the far right or the far left, or though I do believe, and I hopefully will get into this tonight a little, I think there are outsiders that are trying to pit us against each other that really do want to see our democracy destroyed.
There are people that are on television on a nightly basis that aren't in leadership, that don't control the agenda, but they make for good headlines. And that's on us, because that shouldn't be happening. But with that, Fred, when you were in Congress, as often as not, when you were working on something, including some very important medical issues, it was with a Democrat. I mean, that's what you did. And I ask you the same question. How do you manage that when it gets more, and both of you are friendly with leadership when you were in the House, and leadership sometimes likes to kind of get people to go in different directions, but you seem to have your own drummer, as do you.
Well, a couple things. I never thought I was going to run for Congress. Met some people here tonight who were with me on my very first campaign. It was really nice to have them here, too, and see them. But I'm the Reagan model, okay? I had never been to Washington until Dave Stockman won his race. And he asked me to be in charge of constituent service, and that's what I did, and lived with a guy from Niles and met my great wife, and had a chance to work at the White House. And here was a Republican president with a Democratic Congress, and he got things done. And the proof in the pudding is the re-election 4 years later. He won all but Minnesota. Only Walter Mondale stopped him from winning all 50 states. A Republican winning New York, Massachusetts, California, name the others. I mean, it was incredible. But why? Because he had established relationships with the other side of the aisle in both the House and the Senate. And he had him over for drinks at the White House. And that's fun to go up there, let me tell you, up to the resident. But he had a relationship, and the votes weren't even that close that we had in the Congress. And so that's how I came about. So when I ran, when people encouraged me to run, and first Amy and I said no, and then we came back at us and we decided to run a few months later, and we won ultimately 25 elections. But I'm always going to work with a Democrat on virtually everything that I do, everything. my first bill that I got enacted was for the Great Lakes. We have an oil response team for the Great Lakes. And we've used it. I was there as a member of Congress 2 decades later. But on health care, there was not a bill that I introduced, I don't think ever, that I didn't find a Democrat to be with me. Sometimes it was Upton and Fume, sometimes it was Kennedy Upton, sometimes, actually Amy got really jealous because there was a really fine Democrat by the name of Tim Penny from Minnesota. Penny Upton. I'll confess, I dated a Penny before I met Amy. There were a lot of Penny Upton amendments on the House floor back in the early 90s. So, but if you want to get things done, knowing that you have to get 60 votes in the Senate, if you don't have if you don't have a relationship with the folks over there, and I would go over to the Senate floor at least once or twice a month, you don't get things done. And so when I became chairman, I'll close on this, when I became chairman of Energy and Commerce Committee, we got rid of the seniority system, so it was one of the best things Newt Gingrich ever did when he did that. And I competed against 3 other guys, some of them senior to me. I still wouldn't be chairman today if that hadn't been changed. But I got together the former chairs together for dinner. John Dingell, Henry Waxman, Tom Bliley, Billy Tozan. We got to dinner and we just talked about the jurisdiction of our committee, all the different issues, and how do you get things done? How do you work with the other side? Because if you could pass a bill out of our committee, in essence 50 members, and Debbie's on it now, does a wonderful job. If you can pass a bill out of committee with 40, 45 votes, guess what? It's going to pass big time on the House floor, and you're going to get the attention in the Senate to get it done there too, and it's going to get signed into law by either a Republican or a Democrat at the end of the day. And that's what you want to do. If you want to make a difference, you got to figure things out and work together to get it done.
Just a quick follow-up. There is a story from a Saturday morning when you were working before you guys ended up at the White House. Do you remember the story I'm talking about? You answered the phone?
Oh, yeah, I do. It's actually a better story what Mark was saying earlier about what I told Biden in my first meeting with him. But maybe if we get at the end with not enough questions, we'll get to that. But,
Okay.
So I'm 4 years as a staffer on Capitol Hill. I am married. No, I'm not married. I'm not married. And my office, I lived with 2 other guys on Capitol Hill, a block from the office. And so I went in on the Thanksgiving Sunday after the election because Stockman had a very good electric typewriter. This was before the internet and so, and it had that little erase button with the little pinky, and it would automatically go back, and with chalk you'd hit that same letter, and it'd make things look perfect, especially if you Xeroxed it. So I'm there. I decided after 4 years of working on Dave's staff that I was ready for a new challenge. I had mastered it. It was a great job. I got to help a lot of people. So it's about 2:30 in the afternoon, and Sunday of Thanksgiving weekend, and phone rings, and I go, Congressman Stockman's office, how can I help you? And this voice goes, is he there? And I said, no, sir, he's not. Pause. Well, this is Ronnie Reagan. He said, I know, I recognize your voice, Governor, because he wasn't president yet. He said, well, I'd really like to talk to him. I said, well, he happens to live next door to me, so I can find him really quick. He said, well, here's my number. And so anyway, he asked Dave to call him back, so I got to Dave, and a shorter story is that I made Dave promise to call me back after he talked to him. And so he called me back, and he said, Fred, you cannot tell anybody this, but he just asked me if I was the only one to beat him in 2 debates, Reagan, in the mock debates. And as a reward, he was going to be offered to be the director of the Office of Management and Budget. And that had to go through the confirmation and, all the background checks and all that. And so Dave's, couldn't tell anyone for weeks what was going to happen. And then, of course, as you look at my career, I ended up working for him. I started as a legislative aide in the Office of Legislative Affairs, and ultimately was in charge of that office with weekly meetings with the president and really working on exactly what I did as a member of Congress. So I I felt that I had a leg up, that I could, from day one, I had the relationships with the leadership on both sides because they knew me. I was a lobbyist for the administration, and everything played out. So it was great.
How much does your experience in Washington help you? I mean, you know that town as well as anybody. And having served in the House and been there when your husband was serving, I mean, it seems such a natural thing. But yet, you still go out of your way to make those relationships. I mean, you would clearly be a candidate for leadership. And one of the things that happens, I think, is once you get at that level, maybe you don't do as much with folks across the aisle. Maybe the good ones do. But what has it been like for you, knowing the town as you do, and then trying to work around the norms of just getting on our side and not, and you said listening, and I think that's terribly important, but I mean, what has it been like as you've watched this evolve?
So I'm me. So, look, I was married to the greatest man in the world. I miss him every single day. And he was always that way. He mentored Fred. He was the person that told Fred to get on energy and commerce. I might have even helped him get energy and commerce so you didn't.
Yeah, he did.
Which is arguably, maybe, not to interrupt, but just to think about it in these terms, because Congressman Dingell, before Debbie Dingell was on the chairman of that committee, Fred was the chairman of that committee, you're on that committee. It's arguably one of the most powerful committees.
Take the argument out. It is.
Okay, because they touch everything. Sorry to interrupt. So I wanted to emphasize how important that was.
But that's just how I always was. Now, the world has changed. You know, my life has been, I'm not old, but I'm seasoned. And I have a lot more energy, and I'm not going anywhere. I don't have Amy so I'm going to stay, and I plan on working for a lot longer. But when I married John, look, I was the young wife, and I didn't know how young I was until now that I'm a little more seasoned, how young I was. But it wasn't a news story that John was marrying this woman that was so much younger than him. It was a news story that I was going to keep working. That's how much the world has changed. I worked for General Motors then and continued to work for General Motors until 2008 when the crisis came. And at that point, I was worried about the conflict. So, but I was working for General Motors before I ever met John Dingell, too. But in those days, which wasn't that long ago, it is, but it isn't. Members moved to Washington. They raised their families there. People got to know each other. I mean, I think, Congress is supposed to be a representative body. And I think that what you're seeing in Congress is also reflective of what's happening in the country. So members don't get to know each other anymore like they did. They'd, spend weekends. Their kids were there. They'd have potluck dinners. Their kids would date. They didn't in those days care if they were Republican or Democrat. The older kids babysat for the younger kids. John knew as many. I mean, I knew the Senate, but Fred was deliberate in going to the Senate to make sure John Dingell, look, even the senators paid attention to John Dingell, although he still, to his dying day, thought we should eliminate the Senate. But it is the truth. But and I remember when families started coming, Amy, you'll probably remember this, and people wanted to stay at home and not move. And at first the spouses were outraged and would tell them they had to move. And now, quite frankly, I mean, I'm on that first plane out of there as soon as we're done voting. I don't want to stay in Washington 1 second longer than I have to. But you, too, lived through that.
Yeah, but those
change.
video games work. You know, the one with the little Volkswagen, and you're like driving away. I could get to DCA. I would park next to the house steps, and I could get to DCA in 8 minutes.
I know.
I mean, I'm not kidding. And find a parking place.
That's all true. But think about the younger people. Do they have relationships? Do they talk to each other? I'll say to my kids, call somebody, and we had a huge screw-up several months ago. And I said, did you call them? And they say, yes. I meant, did you talk to them? Did you talk about the subtleties? Did you get in? Think about how many people don't know anybody anymore. They text each other. People don't develop relationships, and relationships matter. If you know, so they do. If you know somebody, you develop trust, you know you can, and that's what's missing, relationships and trust. Do you disagree?
Give you an example, and I appreciate you talking so much about the new environment, relatively new environment, where everybody does come home all the time. And on one hand, I appreciate the attention to the district. We have seen members who haven't come home and couldn't find their own office in the district, and that's not good. But it's also good to create those kind of relationships. I'll tell you a quick story. Susan Ford told me a few years ago. She remembered weekends when she and Cokie Roberts would play in Statuary Hall while their dads, Hale Boggs and Congressman Ford, were working on a Saturday morning. And those were the kind of relationships they had, and it was just common. They had each other over for dinner and the whole thing. How hard is it to develop those relationships now? I mean, and I don't mean hard in the sense of getting people to get along, but just be around people long enough.
You have to be intentional. I am intentional, so are you. When Fred was chair of the committee, he worked to bring people together, to bring members together. You've got to be very intentional about setting up dinners or, going and sitting on the floor talking to people. And even then, you get to know your delegation, your committee assignments. Maybe it's hard. You have to be intentional.
It is hard. The other factor that's present today, and it really grew over the last, certainly the last 10 years, is just, I always rightly said, family comes first, job comes second, campaign comes third. If you do the first two right, campaign ought to come along okay. Raising the money for these campaigns, and just, when I first ran, remember I beat this guy by the name of Mark Siljander. He outspent us 3-1. We spent $100,000 and we won 56-44. All right. He had some flaws, so I'm not going to go into that. But today, so 25 elections, 25-0 for me. Had, I think, 9 primaries or 7 primaries, even at the tail end of my career as chairman of Energy and Commerce. Some state reps ran against me that were serious contenders. They were statewide. Jack Hogendijk was a statewide Republican winner for U.S. Senate against Carl Levin. He ran against me twice. You got to raise millions of dollars. So all of a sudden, it's a lot of money, but remember, it's capped. The most an individual could give back then was $1,000. Now it's like $2,600 or something like that. That's a lot of $2,600 contributions to lead up to the $7 or $8 million that you have to raise every cycle, let alone the special op money that comes in, the dark money, as they say, that might surprise you 2 weeks out. I can remember being in Matawan one morning 2 weeks out, and all of a sudden my ledge director gets a call and said they just did a $800,000 buy against you on Channel 3 and Channel 8.
Thank you.
And I go, where is this money coming? We're fine. Our numbers are good. Who's spending? And then it got up to like $3 million against me the last 2 weeks. And it just out of the blue. So that now takes a lot of time. People have to go, it's easier today. It's obviously illegal to do it from your office, all right? It used to be you had to go to the Republican club or the Democratic club and you had a little phone booth that you'd spend hours in. Now you can take your campaign cell phone and go out in the park, as long as you're not in the building, and make those calls so you don't have to go to the phone booth. But that's a lot of time. And what does it take away from? It takes away from your family. It takes away from your district. It takes away from your committee assignments of what you're supposed to be working on, let alone being prepared for the 600 or 700 recorded votes that you have every year. So that's a big problem now, and wasn't so much back 10, 15 years ago.
Let me ask you both this question. You do not have to answer this, but I have heard Other members, neither one of you. Talk about pressure from the party to go and spend hours making phone calls, raising money, not just for themselves, but for other candidates or perhaps for the DCCC or the Republican National Congressional Committee. Is that an added burden? First, does that happen? And
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, so it depends. So there's two different, if you're a frontliner, either party, they tell you how much you've got to raise, they put pressure on you, they won't match you, which, if you're a frontliner, and there's several in this state, they're very competitive races in this state. Then you also, I am in leadership, and I didn't get into it till halfway in the year, and my dues are absurd. And I'm not meeting them this year. I hate raising money. I'm allergic to it. I came to Congress to work on problems and solve problems, and I didn't come to raise. So I'm probably known as one of the worst fundraisers I hate it. It's why I'm not running for the United States Senate. I just cannot live on that. But this Senate race is going to be a $40–50 million race on either side. I don't like having to do negative ad. I will if I have to someday, but it's why I'm not running. I hate it. So, but I would go no further if I don't. I will have to hire a better fundraiser, do more next period, next cycle, if you even want to stay in leadership. And you had the same.
It's the same on the Republican side. I'll say that, I was asked, so you don't say no. I was asked to chair the 2 spring dinners. We raised $10 million each of those dinners. I did much of the heavy lifting for that, and it took a month of time that I had to do. And it went to the NRCC. It didn't go to me. And again, these races, I'm still on everybody's email list, so I get all these things. I mean, it's a lot worse today. I mean, now that same dinner that I used to raise, it's now 2 or 3 times that. But it's all the time. It's not just the spring. It's every month there's something going on, and all these different events, and you got to book your time to go do those if it's
If you
part
want to
of
get
the drill.
elected, you want to be a committee chair, or you want to be in leadership, you have dues too. I mean, if the committee chairs or those in leadership don't produce the amount of money, you're not going to get reelected, and you won't be committee chair.
But it's even more than that, because not only do you have to raise, are you given a quota number, you also then, every member on your committee says, hey, will you come out to Oklahoma? Will you come out and do this? So you've got 30 members that you got to go do events for in addition to what you're doing. I mean, it's
to
like,
be elected chair, you
it's
got
a
to give money
slog.
to everybody that you want to vote for you
yeah,
too.
but it helps when you have some other issues to help you along.
True.
I don't know that this fits the conversation, but we've talked too much about money not to ask the question. What do we do about that? How do you keep races from being $40 million? How do you keep House races from being 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 million dollars? I mean, I get it. You got to buy stuff from us. I get none of that, by the way. But it's not just that. I mean, it's everything that you do. And I'm not suggesting that you put some kind of limits, but should we think about that?
I'd say yes, because I hate it, and we need campaign finance reform, but you can't get it through Supreme Court.
Yeah, that's the issue. Let me just say something about Debbie. So I know Debbie really well. We've been very good friends, personal friends. But I also know people in her district, and I know that she works her district. I mean, she's at every farmer's market every Saturday. I mean, she's doing parades. She's doing town meetings.
Follow her on Facebook.
No, I mean, it's
She's
just
everything.
she works her district like a blanket. All right, she covers it. So, how much? And she did not have a primary. She's got a general. But how much money will you spend this year? About?
Well, I have to. My dues
$3
alone
million?
are. I should, but I'm not going to get
No, you
there
just-
with my dues.
yeah, just- yeah.
But I mean, you need to give to other candidates.
She's in the
but-
Detroit media market.
I don't do ads. I won't do ads. I'll do mailers. I've got to give to.
That
But I
postage
go
just
to
went on.
events. You don't get it. I want to be known in my district. On a Sunday, a Saturday, a typical Saturday, we just call it a Saturday. I do 14 events. I want to be there. I want to be present. I leave my house at 6 in the morning, and I normally get home by 10 o'clock at night.
There is. I'll call her on a Saturday, and that's where she'll be, and then I'll see Facebook pictures, and then it's like, and you know, there are probably 3 or 4 in our district. What used to be a perfect square, right? It was like, you know, county lines. We would have, not on the 4th of July, but on a non-4th of July type weekend, we would have 5 or 6 parades every Saturday or Sunday. I mean, someplace, and you can't, you know, we voted against cloning. You can't do them all, right? You gotta, so, but Debbie's doing that. But in addition to that, she still has to raise $3 million for her own race just to make sure she wins in November.
With the amount of money that it takes to win races, the amount of time it takes to raise money, and the things that that takes away with, do those activities further create barriers? Because if my job is to go on the House floor and vote, and then scurry off the House floor and spend a lot of time in an undisclosed location raising money, does that contribute to the time that you don't get to know each other?
Yeah, I want to be honest. I don't do that. That's why I'm in trouble all the time, because I won't do it. I hate raising money, and I won't race off. I don't go to the DCCC and get on the phone and raise money. You had to because you were a committee chair. And I'm getting in trouble right now because I'm not doing it. But and the other thing you said, I told my staff when I first got elected, and Fred's heard me say this, I don't care if I'm on the front page of a story. There are bills that I want to get done, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to get them done. And if I don't get one word in a newspaper, I don't care if I get the bill passed. And that's how you were too. Fred and I didn't do legislation to get, there are colleagues, I'm going to behave, who care about the press coverage. But you and I were never about the press. We were about getting it done. Now, sometimes you've got to generate media to get the pressure to try to, to create the broader, in this state, there are issues sometimes when you want to get bipartisan support. You need to get people in other districts to tell their member to do it. But we never did something for media. We did it. We would like brainstorm, okay, who do we get? How do we get this done? And that's what you were always like too.
You got to work with the folks on both sides of the aisle. And remember, in the House, you don't have assigned seats. So you can move around wherever you want to go. And it's sort of often hard to find me because I would be lots of different places with a laundry list of who I wanted to find and get them on a bill or talk to them about something like that when you have those votes. Sometimes you'd have a vote to approve the previous day's journal. I would sometimes call that vote just to get members on the floor so they couldn't hide when you called their office and the person would say, I don't know, let me check to see if they're there. And I'm like, man, if my staff doesn't know that I'm in the office when somebody calls, there's a problem there. But there's a lot of work, and you actually saw that in the debate for speakership last year when before the House rules were established, the C-SPAN cameras could roam the whole floor. And you saw all these people talking to each other, and the reporters were commenting, Chip Roy's talking to so-and-so, and, that means what's going on. You could see that. That goes on all the time when we have a vote, but the public doesn't see that because the C-SPAN camera is just leveled on whoever's speaking.
But you don't see Republicans and Democrats go to each side like you and I do.
Yeah, I did it.
Well, and that's kind of the point of why we're here, because they don't. And quickly, you told me something in October of last year, and you said, I don't remember the number, if Republicans don't get more than X seats, it's going to take a bunch of votes to get a speaker.
Yeah.
And
they didn't. It took 15 votes.
How bad of a look is that?
Well, the Constitution requires that the Speaker doesn't get a majority of people. I mean, he has to get a majority of the whole House. So you need 218 votes. So if you got a couple of guys and they're holding out for, I'll say it, Justin Amash, and he got some votes one time, that takes away from the 218 and you don't get a Speaker. So that's why for 3 weeks think it was about that long, we didn't have a speaker. And then you have this crazy rule that one member can have a privileged motion to vacate the chairmanship, the speakership, and that's allowed to happen, which is why Kevin McCarthy was ousted, because he then saw that he couldn't get 218. So they're going to go through this whole thing again. So those rules have to change. And actually, that's one of the things the Problem Solvers Caucus worked on getting done, and then Kevin McCarthy actually undid them when he tried to get the votes for Speaker. Pelosi, we forced her in a box. She almost had the same thing 2 years prior. And we had some Democrats to say, Nancy, I'm not going to vote for you for Speaker unless you change a couple of these rules to allow for more bipartisanship. And one of them has to be this, this thought that one person can eject the Speaker. And she agreed to that. Kevin, in getting his votes, one member said, you got to change that back. And Kevin said, okay, for your vote, I'll do that. And he did. And it cost him. It was his own fault.
What was that
change
like?
Again. To go back to where it was.
You were there when that was all
It
going
was
on.
painful. I mean, I think it was, you all watched it on television. We were an embarrassment to the country. And it was even worse when Kevin was thrown out as Speaker and trying to find a new Speaker. Republicans really, it was an embarrassment for Republicans. It just was. I don't think it was a good look for the country. I don't always look at things it wasn't a good look for the country. We were being looked at. It's why I keep saying to you, democracy is on the line. And I am, first of all, Michigan's a purple state. I'm going to just say that point blank. It is not clear to me who's going to win Michigan, but I believe that Michigan is a battleground state. I believe that there are people here that could turn Michigan on Election Day or the day after into January 6th on steroids. I think there are outside forces that are trying to pit people against each other, and that we really, all of us, no matter who we are, where we come from, have to stand up to evil and to hatred and division wherever we see it, and be intentional about fighting against it.
I want to finish up this part of the conversation by talking about the problem solvers. How many in the audience know what the problem solvers are? You got a great crowd here. If that many of you are that tuned in. Debbie, tell me a little bit about.
I'm going to let Fred
You want Fred to start this one? Fred, this is something, when you first told me about, I had a skeptical reporter attitude. And I thought, well, that's not going to work. And it got bigger every year.
So I got involved with it the second term, so probably after I was chairman. So it was probably 2017 was when I think I got involved. 2017, 2018. I got asked by a colleague to join this thing, and I had some extra time because I was no longer chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee. And this was something, but it was 55 or so members, both sides of the aisle equally, so it must have been 56. And we would meet literally every week. And I ended up being not the vice chair of the Problem Solvers Caucus. And we would meet every Wednesday from 9 to 10 in the Cannon Building. And during COVID, we actually did Zooms every week. We had Zelensky on once for an hour. And we left our political issues at the door. And everything that was said in the room stayed there. You could bring one staffer, and everyone was sworn to secret that you didn't rat on anybody else and views or anything else. And we would bring in CEOs. He brought in the CEO of Intel, and he talked about the need for microchips. And Mary Barra, chairman and CEO of GM, when Debbie and I went to the auto show a couple years ago, she gave me a bear hug right after the president signed that, because they couldn't build cars without the microchips. They were just building them, and they just had to park them for months until they could get that microchip so you could get the stuff that was in your car that you wanted to get. And, we learned about these things, and we passed some pretty big legislation. We passed immigration reform for farmers. And believe me, they knew it. We need migrant workers for our farmers we don't need them in January, February, but we need them we need them from asparagus to apples. Where's Winkle? And you got to have, and the system is just broke. We need them up at Mackinac Island, workers that are there, and all the different things. So we passed immigration reform, but the Senate didn't do it. It wasn't a comprehensive bill, but it was more targeted. We did the infrastructure bill, and we included a couple things. Governor Larry Hogan invited a bunch of us up to his residence in Annapolis. And we had senators and House members, and we talked about, President Biden talked about infrastructure, and he had a whole laundry list of things, but many of us said, some of that isn't infrastructure. You're talking about entitlement stuff and some other stuff. It never goes away. Let's talk about roads and bridges. I raised my hand and said, we need to replace these lead lines. I got a community. We got Flint in Michigan, but we got more than that. We need money to replace those lead lines and airports and bridges and we need to find a way to pay for it. We got the Chamber of Commerce to support it. But anyway, end of the day, the Problem Solvers Caucus, when I was there, passed some pretty major legislation that the Senate ultimately went along with because we had enough votes, bipartisan votes in the House. And to his credit, President Biden, says, I got things done in a bipartisan way. And it was bipartisan because we joined in, changed the dynamics of, some of the stuff that he wanted. But ultimately, we compromised, and we got a pretty decent bill in terms of what happened. We got money. We got money for the Great Lakes. The Palisades plant down here? The money to open that up was in the infrastructure bill. That's where it came from. 600 jobs here locally. And it's green energy, nuclear power. So, it was a big bill, but it was the right bill, and we got it done. Now, sadly, since I've been gone, the Problem Solvers Caucus is, they've had a couple of issues, personality issues, that I hope get resolved after November.
Some of us are working it.
I know.
That's why I wanted Fred
So
to start.
I am helping elect some of the right people to get into that thing because, look, it is going to be a close election. And whoever wins, we know that we've got a nation full of problems. And we cannot continue to kick the ball down the road. We have to deal with them. And the only way that will happen, because the Senate, I don't care if it flips or not, actually I do care, but no one's going to have 60 votes. The only way that things are going to happen is if they work together on both sides. And I'll say this to close this little speech. So I've been involved with a group called No Labels, which is sort of like Problem Solvers. I'm an I'm an advisor to them, all right? They're having a major conference in Washington in December. And I have urged the leadership of No Labels to invite the 2 vice presidential candidates to be the speaker. The loser probably will say, sorry, I'm not going to come. But whoever the winner is, either Vance or Walz, is likely to be the legislative leader for the next president because they've had the experience either in the Senate. Walz was in the House. I served with him. Know him. Governor, of course. So they're likely to be the person that really moves the ball for a legislative agenda, just like Stockman did for Reagan. He had people around him. Reagan had great people around him who sort of led that. So let's invite the vice presidential candidate and let them see what No Labels is about and how we can work together in a bipartisan way to deal with immigration, to deal with the debt, to deal with tax code. The tax code expires next year, so that's got to be dealt with. We got veterans issues. We have all these. How can we as an organization work in a bipartisan way to get rid of this morass, dysfunction that we all see, whether you're in the Beltway or whether you're outside of the Beltway, that we've seen the last 2 years?
Just to put a little finer point on that, think about it. In an evenly, narrowly divided House, if you control 56 votes, if you can get 56 people to vote the same way, it can have a major impact on major legislation. So we're going to wrap this section up. I want to ask you this. If you had every member of the House and every candidate that is running for the House, and you had their attention in this room, what would you tell them about your experience with Fred, your experience with other people across the aisle, and why that makes sense if you want to be an effective member of Congress?
I would tell them, I think I told you this at the time. When Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Pope, I'm behaving.
Is this before she slugged you?
Yes. And
Didn't she go after you on the House steps?
Yes, she did. But before I went over to them and talked to them and said, get to know people. Actually, it was when they were doing the gun stuff, and I tried to tell them about John, too. They were carrying their guns around and and I was like, they thought I was crazy when I don't think they believed me. When Lauren and I are friends, we do talk. But I said, my husband was actually a board member of the NRA. Now, it was a different NRA. Let me be really clear on that. But I said, get to know people. Don't go. I mean, obviously, this was when times were changing. Because I'm not, Marjorie Taylor Greene does what she does to get in the news. She does it for the news cycle. She does it to raise money, and she does it. I'm not sure that everybody does, but I think people need to develop relationships, take time to get to know each other, find common ground, and I say that whenever it's new.
But let's just stop for a moment and recognize that you've had almost a full hour to sit and listen to two of the most effective legislators that have ever served from the state of Michigan, and we should recognize that. All right, first question, and there are no names on these, so here we go. I'll give it first to you. I'll give you both a chance at it, but since you brought it up, it is, what can we, the citizens, do to save our democracy?
So I think we need to all be really aware of what's happening. This weekend in Ann Arbor, a number of very not good things happened. There were signs that were posted on lampposts and trees that said, kill a Zionist today, keeps genocide away, kill your rep. I love that one. There were hate flyers left on people's driveways. 5 men went to a liquor store that had an Israel flag. But women that wear Sherpas are being threatened. I mean, it's hate. It's sheer hate and division. And this is where I do believe people are, from the outside, are trying to pit us against each other. And then I also heard this weekend, someone said to me, and Jennifer Conlon, who's the state legislature, had a different person say it, if Donald Trump loses Michigan, you better have food in your freezer and a place to hide. That's already happening. And I think we got to be prepared to stand up to it. I think we've got to try to tone down the hate when we see it in our communities. Stand up to it. And I think you need to be asking your other elected representatives. I'm not going to tell you who it was, but it's another Republican, was on the phone with me this weekend, and we were talking about something else, and I said, will you join with me? I'm looking at Fred because he would have done it. And said, can we make sure as a delegation we stand up for civility and respect on election day? And that person wouldn't say yes. Doesn't mean they won't look at it. But I think you need to be asking all of your elected officials. People are losing. I saw this in the town hall last night. They don't respect institutions anymore. People don't trust that what's going to happen at the polls is going to be the actual results of the election. We already know that people are playing with votes and trying to create and sow doubt. We need people to volunteer to be at the election polls, to be workers, to stand. We do. We gotta. They can't be afraid. But we have to stand up to hate and division, and we've got to rebuild trust in institutions. And it's easier said than done.
A quick note about that. If you know anybody who is skeptical, if you know anybody that has questions, every county clerk in this state does voter testing, voter machine testing. You can go and watch that. You can go and see how this is going to happen. You can volunteer at the polls. They need volunteers now more than ever with early voting and no reason absentee voting. There's so many different moving parts, and their staffs are not big enough to do it. So if you know somebody that's got questions, my experience has been that the clerks in Michigan are only too happy to tell you why this is safe, why it's reliable, why they make sure they have checks and balances. So that is one resource. I'll go to you with the question.
We're actually, just a quick note. So I'm a board member of the former members of Congress, and they've got a number of really good things that they're doing. One of them is we're going to have a seminar in Grand Rapids. I don't know if you know about this, in about a month.
I'm hosting it.
And, okay, all right. I didn't know that. I don't either.
And I'm on the board.
No, yeah. Right. But we're having Republicans and Democrats along with state officials, and we're just going to talk about the voting process here in Michigan and how it ought to be and how it's run. And you'll remember that 4 years ago now, after the 2020 election, there was a Republican state Senate investigation as to the voter fraud in Michigan, and they found none. 145,000 votes. What was the difference? And they found maybe 2 people that voted absentee that died between, that they didn't know about. But I mean, clearly it didn't overthrow the election.
But you do have to tell your elected officials that's what you expect of them. You know, the other thing that I'm doing, because I've gotten together with my law enforcement, and I'm pulling all of my mayors and my supervisors together, because you may all not be aware of this. I think you were. There were rumors in 2020 the militia were going to come in and take over, and Jerry Clayton and I pulled together all of our local law enforcement, all the mayors and supervisors, and I made every mayor and supervisor with witnesses, because we were all in the same room, pledge to their law enforcement chief if something happened, they were going to have their back if they had to do something. So we all, we got to...
A quick note, and I hope I'm talking about the same event. This is one with Jocelyn Benson and Lisa Posthumous Lyons.
Dave Trott, Mark
Yeah.
Shower.
Is it at the Ford? There's
I
one
think it's at the Ford. Yeah, it is.
I said I was in the Ford.
And I only bring it up because when they called me to do that, I was so intrigued with the bipartisan lineup and the discussion, because these people are free to dissent if they want to when they have this conversation. But I promise you, by the end of it, I think they'll all be singing from the same hymnal, because I can go back to 2000, remember the disaster that we had in Florida. And then
Some of us
Secretary of
never will
State
forget it.
Candace Miller walking me through the process of Michigan votes 24 years ago, and convinced me at that point that we had a safe and secure voting system. And clerks since have done this. I'll start first, if I can find it. I'll go with you first, Fred. What advice would you give young people who are interested in pursuing political office?
Do it. We need you. So, quick thing. I'll be fast. So, also a mission of the former members of Congress is a program called Congress to Campus, where they take a Republican and a Democrat, and we went last year to, I believe, 90 different universities. I did 4. I did Cornell, I did the Naval Academy, I did Suffolk. I didn't even know where Suffolk was. It's in Boston University. And I'm doing UConn in 2 weeks, where I'm going to go with with a Democrat, and we're going to speak to 20 or 25 classes, law school, podcasts, media interviews and talking about how we need them to be active, the students, that there is a reward in working with Republicans and Democrats and really putting on a different face than what you might otherwise see. And they've really been instructive. I mean, it's really been terrific. And for me, I just say this. You know, when I was in office, until COVID, I went to a school every week. And I got Debbie to come to a number of my schools with me, actually. High schools, middle schools, elementary schools. My staff, and Al Pashoka's here, right? Where's Al? He might have just left. He was here earlier. But he ran my office, later a state rep, budget director here for the state of Michigan. He knew on my schedule, every week I'm at some school someplace, which really gave me a great entree then, doing these universities that I'm doing now, and will continue.
You've got lots of young people in your district, and I'm sure many of them are interested in politics. Do they talk to you about that?
Yes, they do a lot. What worries me is many of them don't want to do it anymore either, but I tell them to network, to get to know people. Relationships matter. And I also tell people not to get poli-sci degrees, but to actually to like follow their passion, to learn to become an expert in something and bring that to it.
Do you have some more questions, sir? Are those? Thank you.
I will say Debbie has a very important visitor to her district tomorrow, so she's going to be leaving promptly to get back to the other side of the state.
You see if I can get an interview?
Listen, everybody thinks I invited him and got him to go to the
You
Ann
just
Arbor.
got the scoop. See, you know that he's coming.
It's public. The last place I would tell Joe Biden to go is Ann Arbor right now, but he's coming. And the protesters are going to be there.
All right, I think we know, maybe, but beyond the question of democracy, we've all got that thing. But it's bigger for you, certainly was for you when you were a member and continues to be because you're concerned. What is the thing that keeps you up at night when you look across all of the things Fred outlined that have to be done by Congress this year, including something called a budget? I mean,
Which we're probably not going to do. If we do it, well, we are still debating the continuing resolution. Will we do it before? I know. This is why Amy doesn't have to worry about his ever thinking of coming back because he doesn't miss it. But, I mean, we do need to do a budget. Now, some people want to keep it to, for 6 months, which means we'll get nothing done. We'll get no appropriation bills done before the end of next year. I mean, we need a farm bill. Michigan needs a farm bill, and it's not just for the farmers. We make things and grow things. The farmers need it, but children's lunches and I'm just worried about total dysfunction and it's not getting legislation done on so many issues that we need to be.
There's a $20 billion shortfall for our veterans in 2 weeks. I mean, think of the impact on their disability payments, on offices that are open. It's got to be dealt with, and we have no clue what's going to happen. And it's got to go through the House and the Senate.
Correct.
With the shutdown coming September 30th with some crazy stuff that's
And
out.
we're going to put, instead of just passing it and doing it and being responsible, they want to do a message bill that has zero chance of passing in the Senate. It is a terrible piece of it's called the SAFE bill, and it's a total message bill designed to make it look like we have a ton of people that aren't U.S. citizens voting in elections, which is not true. There are processes in place in every single state to make sure that only citizens are voting, and there are. And it's one, just the messaging itself against builds distrust in the institution. It creates impediments to people being able to vote. And if you really do something, invest in antiquated voting machines that are across the country and make it easier for people to vote rather than disrespecting and scaring people.
And it'll take a whole week of legislative time between now and September 30th. A whole week.
How
See, Fred and I
has,
agree.
if it has changed, how has it changed serving in Congress since January 6th?
I try not to think about it. I was on the floor. Fred was one of the people that kept calling me to see if I was safe. And actually, I didn't realize what was going on. I didn't see them take Nancy off, and the staff came over to me and said, will you go to the mic and will you and Jim McGovern keep people calm? And I went, calm from what? Until they told us to get on the floor and pull off our gas masks. Pull out the gas masks. But still, we did not see, I didn't have a television where we were taken. So until we finished voting and actually certifying the election, I didn't know what happened outside. I think the fact that so many Republicans didn't vote to certify the election, I think the fact that that so many, there are people, and you're seeing it more now than you did then. I mean, I was there on the floor with Republicans who were as scared as we are, and I won't name names, but people that may be close to this area who helped barricade the doors, who now were like, oh, it didn't happen, or it didn't matter. It did happen, and it was a threat to our democracy. And I think that people are more scared, quite frankly. There are some people that don't want to run for office because they're afraid of the kind of death threats and the potential violence. And my attitude is we can't let that happen. We cannot let them scare us away, but that's why you all need to be part of it.
You know the institution pretty well, and you still know a lot of people that serve up there. Has it changed the minds of some of the people that you know about whether they want to serve?
Yeah, that has, and I was there January 6th for another 2 years after that, and I saw it, from my balcony. Those of you that visited me in
You
my
were there,
office,
weren't you?
I was
forget
there.
that.
Yeah,
'Cause
I was
he
not
kept
on the
trying to get
floor,
me to
but
come
I
in
was.
your office.
I was watching on TV. I knew immediately what was happening, and I had a balcony as one of only two in the building. So I was on my balcony and I watched the crowd come down. I saw the hangman's noose for Pence and the shouts, and I double locked my door and knew what was going on. That hasn't changed so much in terms of people wanting to run again, because thank God we did have the Capitol Police, and they did a heroic job. And some of you have seen some of the videos, and I know some of the officers that they shared it with me, those way before they became public. But what I think really is detriment to getting good people to run is there is an impact on your family, no matter things are perfect or not. But second, it's just the dysfunction, the craziness that goes on. People say, I got a great life. I'm this profession or that, and why do I want to have to raise $8 million? And who's got the wherewithal to? It's a really tough cycle. And when you see the dysfunction that's there, and what's going to happen, this likely will happen this month. It's like, when can these guys do anything? And so that's part of our mission is, when we go to these college campuses, the issue is now. We need good people to think about running to try and counter that. But I think that is a bigger detriment than the violence that we've seen.
I hear it more because people are seeing it in their offices now.
And Debbie and I, we had personal threats on us. We've both had police protection.
No, I never had the police protection.
Oh, I did. But that's scary. To me, it's scarier for Amy and the kids.
Yeah.
I can run faster than they can, or at least I used to be able to.
That's to give you a sense of what that looked like internally. This is no loss for Fred or for Debbie, but I was talking to Fred on the phone one day subsequent to that, and it was sometime after that. And I generally go to Washington. I used to go a couple of times a year, go up and talk to the delegation, work both sides of the hill, and he said, you can't even get in the building. you can't even come in because it was still so locked down, and this was months, weeks at least later. So it was certainly a moment of change on Capitol Hill. We're not going to do too many more, but this one is kind of interesting because we talked, I specifically was lamenting all the money in politics, and somebody says, the British and Canada, I believe that's what it says here, have set time limits before their elections, before campaigning can start. First Amendment problem. Should the U.S. start a similar program?
I'd like to say yes, but the whole issue is the Constitution. Who's to say that, you know, I had someone reach out to me this last week. They want to run for office, and they're willing to leave their well-paid job. He's I think engineer is the right term for him, and he wants to run for office in 26. Who's to say I mean, it's it's the Constitution. I mean, it would be pretty hard to craft an amendment that could pass with a 2/3 vote that would allow that to happen.
Especially with this Supreme Court, too.
Well, maybe. Which
Well, what
is the
about
same
it?
reason why you can't cap funding on campaigns.
Right.
Because who's to say, and even to me, remember, I'm not a lawyer, but to me it seems that how can you cap what an individual can give to a candidate? Who's to say that they can't give more? I mean, someday that's going to get tested.
A lot of people, though, are liking what they see as the short campaign cycle on the Democratic side, and you're going to hear a lot more discussion about it.
Well, the idea, though, of trying to limit the time of campaigning would give a distinct advantage to incumbents, too.
That's true.
Because you're back in the district all the time doing constituent
Can I be on your
service.
show again on Sunday?
No, that is true.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right. We've already talked about the expensive.
You know, the one thing that would really help, I think, is if you changed the voting so that you went to either, what is it, preferred, what is it, what is the right term for it? When you, rank order voting, some states have done that.
I hate rank
All
ordering.
right, maybe I could get you on a jungle primary. So it's the top two candidates regardless. So maybe you end up with two Democrats that get the top percentages or top two Republicans. So that,
I mean, that's true. That would, like in these districts, this is a Republican district, so, yeah, I don't know. Rank voting, I don't think anybody understands.
all right, I'll go with jungle voting.
Thanks.
See, they don't agree on everything. That's.
But did you see how we compromised right there?
We talked a little bit about this, but I think it deserves one more bite of the apple. With things as narrowly divided as they are, and the speaker constrained the way he is in the House of Representatives, how does the speaker get anything advanced? How does the speaker get good, important legislation passed when those votes are going to be so narrow?
You develop a backbone, which Nancy Pelosi, I had her heels. I was in trouble with Nancy Pelosi more than, I think that's, right now with that one, I just quite frankly changing the rule of not just one member being able to call for a vacate of the chair, because you are subject to one person getting mad at you and calling to vacate the chair. Although Nancy wasn't afraid to break arms or heels or arms, but that is part of the problem. And Mike Johnson's got a very difficult caucus, and it's very hard for him. I mean, he needs to, I quite frankly, and I think Fred agrees with me, needs to say, we need to get a budget done. We can't shut down the government. And he needs to say to the Freedom Caucus, if you want to keep the majority, you're not going to make the freshmen or the members in these close districts take a vote that's going to backfire on him. But I don't know that he's not going to do it. I don't think.
I don't think it is. The way the process works is you have Mike Denikus was my civics teacher back at St. Joe High School. Tom, you had him, and the way we learned about Congress was you have a committee process, you have votes in committee. I was very fair and, as chairman, so bipartisan amendments always came ahead of the queue, but then it goes to the floor. If you have an amendment that's germane, let it be debated and let it vote. And you allow, in the Republican majority, Democratic amendments and see if they pass. But at the end of the day, you have a product that you then vote on. Today, these bills, this CR that's coming up, continuing resolution and next week, hasn't gone through committee. It's written in the Speaker's office. Doesn't have a single Democrat on board. They've all, because they're not, and when it comes, they'll not allow a single amendment on a $2 trillion bill, probably, $1.5 to $2 trillion bill, an hour debate with not a single amendment offered by a Democrat. Now, how are you going to get that done? It means gridlock.
There may be some Democratic
It's got to
votes,
change.
Fred.
That might vote for it.
5. The 5 that voted for SAFE last time.
We'll see. I bet
I
they
know,
don't.
we'll see.
I bet they don't.
Would you like to get them together in front of a television when the budget is going on and just sit in the background and listen? Okay, final question. You guys have been really patient. And I like this question because I think it speaks, and this is no disrespect to whoever put this question in, because I understand what you're saying. But it's sad to think that people feel like this. And they said it almost looks bad publicly if you work across the aisle. And I know the two of you are working to change that. I think back to 1996, and Bob Dole was Republican presidential candidate. Bob Dole made more deals in the United States Senate than most car dealerships. And because of that, he didn't get the Republican support. He wasn't going to beat Bill Clinton anyway, but he didn't get the Republican support because compromise was a bad word. So we're going to give you the final word, starting with you. How do you normalize it?
I'm luckier than Fred. Fred has been demonized for many of his votes and for working across the aisle. And whether you all remember it or not, I'll never forget it. I wasn't even a member. He needed to be escorted out of a Republican convention by the state police because he is who he is, and he is a man of integrity, and he did do what was right. I don't give a damn, so I'm me. And I walked into the United States Congress, and everybody knew I was bipartisan. I put together the bipartisan retreats before I ever became a member. Committee will yell at me that I work with Republicans too much, that I'm always willing to go on a bill or do this, and I don't care. Today there's a bill I'm going to do on China with another member and apparently the substance people said, okay, and then senior was going to yell at me. I said to my staff for the 100th time, I don't care what senior staff is going to tell me. I don't care. This is the right thing to do, and I'm going to do it. And I would just say I've pretty much done that since I've gotten there, wouldn't you? So I get in trouble.
Well, you just, you have to have a compass. That's sort of what it comes down to. And, in our district, I always felt that people didn't really care if you had an R or a D next to your name. I did doors, I did parades, I did everything, and, covered the district like a blanket, 6 counties, 750,000 people. You're always going to run into someone who doesn't like you. You just got to move on. But you just, but people, our sort of secret sauce was be a listener. Everyone was welcome in my office. I wanted to hear all the arguments, pro and con, from every side. And weigh that. I signed all my mail. I signed my name more than 1 million times in the 36 years that I was in office. Just signed Fred. Crossing that T in Upton is a little bit different. Would take a little more time. But that's what people really, most of the Americans, certainly our district, believe. We sent you there to speak for us. We know you're not going to be with us, maybe particular view 100% of the time, but just listen and just do what's right and try to get things done. That's where most people are. And that's what I try to do. And I was blessed to have a wonderful staff. I mean, both here in the district as well as in D.C. I know the parents of one of my women was there back here from Kalamazoo. They came over. Katie's parents. But we had some just really hard workers that really had the same passion and drive as we did.
Let me say, sure, go ahead. Let me say to the Speakers Bureau for having us down here, it's been a real honor. I appreciate you inviting me to sit with these two, because the reality is you didn't need me. They could have just done this on their own, and they would have done a great job. But thank you for having me. Debbie, I appreciate your time. I always enjoy spending time. The last time she and I talked was with another former congressman, and Harold Ford from the Memphis area, and I used to live down there. And Harold Ford and I have got to know each other, and he's another one of these guys that...
I tried to get him to run on the no labels ticket, Debbie.
No, and thankfully he had common sense.
Yeah.
Fred and I didn't agree on no labels presidential race. Like, we really disagreed. But we had respectful conversations.
All right, you two, you're going to spoil it. And Fred, as always, I appreciate your time and your willingness to talk, and I hope we can all do this again someplace. Thank you all very much. Have a great night. Drive safe.
Thank you all.